Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. Federal Court and Canadian Superior Courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me must be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence, due to my typically gentle nature, is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I've always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation must be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting. I tried to access my Gmail account on my podcast's official contact email address last night, but was met with a notice that my account is temporarily suspended. Tried changing my contact email for that account to my personal one shortly after, but I haven't gotten anything. Tried sending an appeal, but I guess I have to wait for that. It says 2 business days or longer if it's the weekend. It's the weekend. I'm assuming it was because I didn't offer the ability to unsubscribe from the mailing list. I'll be starting every email to my mailing list from now on, indicating how to unsubscribe from it clearly to hopefully avoid that issue moving forward. I'm going to have to wait to hopefully get access to my official podcast Gmail account back to send from it again, though, and I really wanted to release this without delay, so I'll be notifying my mailing list from my personal Gmail account again until I sort that out. I'm hearing spiritually that someone possibly contacted me, but I've just reached the point I heavily doubt that any time I hear it. I've heard it so many times and yet got absolutely nothing actually in the physical world. Still, I guess technically someone could have contacted me and I'm unable to see. I don't know if Google's trying to secretly delete messages I've received and or otherwise restrict me from actually getting communication that would improve my life circumstances. I won't jump to conclusions quite yet, but it should be noted that this kind of behavior puts their company at risk for me being in a position to involve them in a lawsuit over this conspiracy to murder me and all the other crimes going on around me. I send literally only one email, literally the only email I've ever sent from that account, and they instantly suspend my service without warning? Highly suspicious behavior. Well, I guess most people that actually might be inclined to contact me for any reason I'd actually care about most likely also know my personal Gmail email address, so I imagine they'd most likely try contacting that as well if they were actually serious about it. I still haven't gotten any of the documents I've formally requested, by the way. Don't forget the government is well aware of my existence, and it's actually only becoming increasingly obvious to me with every passing day. Some extremely powerful people clearly thought I was going to be dead right now. I made one release notifying the Canadian government they're doing extremely illegal and unlawful things, and I've still received absolutely no documents despite the fact I'm definitely extremely precise and correct in many of the assertions I've made, if not just about all of them. If I was a fraud, the government and or YouTube would have already had this channel removed. Even with them recently restricting my access to Gmail on my official podcast account, my YouTube channel for my podcast is still perfectly fine. I mentioned the More Pegasus account in my last release and decided to watch his latest video to see what he's going to do that most likely does not involve giving me the attention I deserve, because it's just reached the point I've learned to expect that. Starting off, some picture of Toy Story while he's flaunting being criminally negligent to adequately handle the reality of my life with appropriate recognition of my authenticity. Right. So this Pegasus guy is getting cucked by Emaine, who's trying to sabotage and suppress me with egregious defamation of me that attempts to destiny swap me with Kristen and is still currently trying to have me murdered to cover it up. Guess that's another person I'm adding to the list of people I'll be suing and pressing criminal charges against in the future. He's probably such a joke he doesn't even realize how screwed he really is. But let's move past that. Seems this absolute clown iDubbbz is now lying that I'm scared to criticize Ethan Klein in order to further back the existential assault being carried out against me in what is becoming increasingly clear is in no short measure due to Hassan Hamas Didi Piker and his terrorist-supporting criminal friends. I've seen reason to believe in the past that John Sodé has involvement in empowering Hamas as a consequence of his political ties that enable and facilitate his cross-border drug smuggling and likely also drug dealing operation that he runs along with Dixon, and is probably a substantial part of the reason why I actually yet again had another hitman come after me just last night. Another hitman and murder attempt on my life around 12 midnight to 1 a.m.-ish just today. Lots of arguing and yelling between what sounded like at least one male and one female, although likely more than that in total were present, right outside a government building, and they moved around as if they were taunting me, dribbling basketballs and making a ruckus. Police sirens within proximity at multiple points. Again, in what I imagine must have been captured on at least one or more government cameras right outside the building, I hear a male say, "Let's kill him then," definitely loud enough for the cameras to hear. Pretty sure they were talking like they were about to come murder me more than once among their arguing with each other, and I suspect they might have even possibly been threatening to kill each other as well. Prior, at night time, close to before the building closed, there were at least 2 to 3 males being rowdy and essentially threatened to murder me while I was in the washroom. I guess one or more of them, and one or more women, all probably involved in spreading defamatory gossip about me related to the murder I suspect I'm being framed for, were trying to set me up somehow. I suspect they were for some reason left under the impression that I am a drug dealer or a drug addict, or both. Both are completely false and have always been completely false. I was informed by a staff of the building that he was working later than usual and was tired working a lot these days, so I think the government might actually be, to some extent, intentionally protecting me after all, although it should be noted that it took me threatening to sue them publicly with an extremely meticulous release on this podcast before even that seemed evident, and even then, it's insane that the most protection I'm getting is maybe someone monitoring the cameras to make sure they catch me getting murdered, at least on camera if it happens, rather than actually getting contacted by any government officials in any meaningful capacity. This is actually absolute insanity. I literally have blackmail on both President Donald Trump and Elon Musk, but I choose not to engage in criminal acts exerting leverage over them criminally, because I have real integrity, and even if you want to argue some of my perspectives or preferences seem shady, there's nothing blatantly evident as fundamentally immoral in my mental framework. I'm not some evil demons so many try to make me out to be. People say Elon's some shadow government mastermind, but it's me, and I'm being egregiously disrespected literally daily. Kimmy sold me out and egregiously violated my energy with Jamie to get Kimmy a car stolen from Elon's company and Jamie membership to a more prominent talent agency as a result of what I've gathered evidence most likely indicates some kind of pedophilic involvement in probably something related to Diddy's influence that Kimmy and Jamie got involved in and tried to rob me of my soul through the meetup they had where I attended long ago. Kimmy and Jamie probably violated Trump to violate Elon, putting my life in extreme danger entirely against my consent and entirely to my detriment, as basically the two most powerful people in the world think I have some huge issue with them that I in reality don't have at all, and this should be evident, but all you see is Trump and Elon bickering over Elon's funding cuts as if he's going to die within 24 hours if he doesn't get his hands on that money immediately. I don't particularly care about the Epstein files being public or not. I'm perfectly fine with them being public, but I'm not trying to randomly empower Elon if Trump really doesn't want them released for some reason that doesn't help or harm me personally. I don't know how them being released would help or harm me personally at all, since I know I'm not in there, and it seems like a really heavily political thing to even care about them at all. I know I most certainly never went to Epstein's Island, and there's absolutely zero real evidence otherwise, so my life isn't ruined either way. I mean, it really shouldn't be ruined either way as far as I'm aware. I see no reason to be particularly concerned of Trump being a pedophile. I highly doubt that would ultimately be the reason I wouldn't have the power to do something like demand Kimmy get an abortion even if she's 4 months pregnant right now. So I really don't care so much about the catfight between Trump and Elon right now. If anything, it doesn't surprise me that they had public drama because I suspect Kimmy and several of her associates involved in this ongoing conspiracy and attempted murder of me have been pretending behind the scenes that they really support Trump, but then screwed Trump over by accepting a stolen car from Elon's company and then trying to blame Trump for it through entirely non-consensual exploitation of me with criminal activities I've never actually had any part in with any of my knowledge and or consent whatsoever. I'm seeing a bunch more lies in my energy as well. I'm not a crypto trader. I've never traded crypto. I'm not interested in trading crypto. I'm not a part of Tate's online education platform thing, and I have nothing to do with Elon's Doge crypto thing either. Like I've been saying, I make literally no money from this, and I have absolutely no side hustles. I'm too busy struggling to even just survive murder attempt after murder attempt on my life in what's now become literally daily attempts to end my life. I'm not broke, homeless, and eating out of garbages to survive for goddamn fun. I can't afford anything better because all the subhuman filth that have betrayed me in my life all have intentionally been trying to leave me in extreme life-threatening deprivation where I'm vulnerable to hitmen coming after me constantly, which obviously involves leaving me in extreme poverty. I don't know who the Virgo, Aquarius, or Cancer sign subhuman filth might be that I'm hearing are involved in this most recent attempted murder of me, but the Pisces has got to be Kristen and the Scorpio could be Lily and or Edison, I assume, with the Gemini probably being Celine. I'm only seeing increasingly evident signs that a combination of prominent influential public figures along with biological relatives and people I once went to high school with are actively ongoing making attempts to have me murdered, and yet my situation does not improve whatsoever even while screaming about it on the internet in public. Earth is actually a reeking dumpster fire hellhole nightmare beyond words, and I know it sure as hell isn't my damn fault. I'm hearing there are multiple groups involved in sending hitmen after me at different times. It's unclear to me who exactly is contained in each one, and I assume they probably even change as different combinations of these criminals try what seems like every goddamn possible attempt to murder me these absolute maniacs can conceive of. I've really been trying to reserve judgment on people and see the best in Kimmy and her friends, but I'm really only seeing more and more evidence that using, abusing, abandoning, and murdering me is what Kimmy's plan always only ever was, and it seems even being a world leader can't goddamn change things how I'd like, no matter how much I wish it wasn't like this. Words really aren't enough to convey how I feel about it. I will never move on or even consider dating anyone ever without at the very least wide-scale public exposure of this podcast and forcing Kimmy and Jamie to take full public accountability for their role in all the attempted murders on me and the true intentions they had towards me in meeting me at that meetup they were open to letting me attend over 8 years ago. That definitely means they're going to end up getting canceled and their careers ending, and realistically, they're probably also both going to end up getting murdered. I seriously won't ever believe I'm just delusional and being some dumb conspiracy theorist in thinking it was done with targeted malice towards me. My life has literally started completely falling apart ever since that meetup. It's literally only been a downward spiral of increasingly brutal pain and suffering, no matter how good of a person I am and how hard I work to clear my reputation. I absolutely refuse to ever believe that's just a coincidence. From now on, I'm actually going to assume the actual absolute worst from Kimmy and all her associates and everyone else from my past until or unless I actually see behavior that gives me any actually adequate reason to objectively suggest I'm not completely accurate in seeing them all as absolute psychopath, narcissist, subhuman filth that have always had literally nothing but the absolute worst intentions towards me, even from the very beginning of them ever learning of, or perhaps even simply perceiving of, the possibility even of someone as wonderful as me existing. Anyone that wants to try to fault me for that, kill yourself. I've never been suicidal, but every day is such an absolutely insane struggle just to survive that it's like I'll never be able to prove the reality no matter what I do. Anyone that puts any serious extent of opposition towards me at this point, especially if you're someone I once considered myself close to in any substantial extent, you deserve death as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to say this extremely clearly for all the murderous subhuman filth trying to hide behind political mind games and egregiously disingenuous facades of being even remotely actually decent human beings. If you're at all actively trying to suppress and sabotage my prospects of being rich and famous, especially out of jealousy and effectively what is your absolutely unhinged, unbelievably selfish ego with a sense of entitlement to force me to suffer so you can emotionally feel comfortable that I stay in life circumstances looking like a massive fraud and complete loser, literally deserving of having to suffer regularly, having hitmen sent after me, and ultimately get murdered, genuinely kill yourselves. Every one of you. The world is truly a better place without you and people like you in it. You are nothing but a poison this world should seek to fully exterminate. Shortly after my last release on this podcast, I saw indications of what appears to be Kimmy starting to realize how badly Celine manipulated her. Celine told Kimmy that if I get so aggravated by the amount of abuse and resistance I was facing that I end up giving Celine what appears to be a genuine chance to date me as calling her out for her extremely deviously trying to block and ruin my connection with Kimmy, then that means I'm a fraud. Not knowing that Celine was lying to her and Celine actually knew that how I reacted proved I'm actually exceptionally powerful and fully authentic. Kimmy was scared of getting hurt again. That's why she thought Celine was protecting her and saw Celine as a really good friend, maybe even like family. I'm hearing Kimmy believes me now, but because of my energy, not because of my words. Kimmy feels enraged and deeply disgusted at Celine. I'm hearing Celine is losing all the spiritual gifts from her spiritual assassination attempt she did on me, and she's fuming. I'm not surprised. I've now personally witnessed 2 instances of what I'd consider a spiritual assassination attempt. One was first extremely aggressively from just Celine, and then over a year later, much more recently, one that was a coordinated, extremely aggressive, full-on destiny swap attempt to swap my energy with Arya's through all the 7 to 9 energies I exposed a few releases ago. Even after the second attempt, I've still seen various lingering, egregious spiritual violations from Arya, often most violently around the time hitmen are present in my close physical proximity. Both these spiritual murder attempts have failed even as extremely evident, directly manifested events in my physical reality as well, specifically in the form of high-power, precision, long-range energy weapons firing glass-shattering, penetrative laser strikes imperceptible to the naked eye. I've witnessed twice now the seemingly supernatural, random, unexplainable, sudden shattering of glass on windows in a building I've been in, with a peculiar, small, circular shape like an entry point, but no trace of what actually broke the glass in sight, literally like God smiting the glass from the heavens. I witnessed the first instance personally in real time, targeting the skull of the same Asian male that I previously mentioned I consider a stalker who likely has Crip Street gang ties. The strike penetrated and shattered a glass window, and it was at least a few weeks before it was repaired. The Asian male was not visibly physically harmed, but he'd had the audacity to sit in a chair quite close to one I was sitting in. After that, he started lurking from more of a distance. The second instance shattered one layer of glass, but failed to penetrate a reinforced layer that building happened to have for whatever reason. Absolutely no sign of any object that caused the damage in either case. I'm hearing that basically Celine's trying to complain that she's always wanted me, but it's my fault for wanting Kimmy and putting Celine in a difficult spot where she feels confused and as if things are at a standstill between us. That's spell work witchcraft garbage. Celine wants to exert leverage over me through harm. She wants to act like I caused in Kimmy's and others' lives with intentional malice, which in reality, Chloe Chan Kin and or Celine herself did for their own selfish gain entirely at my expense against my consent. Celine's not being understanding, she's being unbelievably extremely controlling and abusive, and extremely deviously at that. Basically, what I'm saying is I'm not at all confused or trying to play some kind of mind games holding back on showing Celine any affection. I want Kimmy and only Kimmy. I don't trust Celine, and that's fully deserved by her because she was always just being unbelievably extremely narcissistic and trying to control me through exploiting Kimmy's insecurities of being afraid of getting hurt by me because of her past traumas. Celine's personality comes off extremely shady and predatory to me, and while perhaps I could tolerate it in a distant platonic friendship dynamic if I get the connection I've always wanted with Kimmy, I have absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever that I could never have an even remotely actually healthy, sincere, worthwhile connection with Celine that I'd actually enjoy and get what I'd ever consider a fair value exchange out of it otherwise. I'm saying this extremely clearly in the most intentionally, extremely meticulously clear manner to try my utmost hardest to make sure there's absolutely no even remotely reasonable room objectively to question my intent. This isn't specifically intended to hurt Celine's feelings, but I don't owe her or anyone else to be overly considerate of her feelings, especially after how neglectful of mine she's been in the past, and I want that to be completely clear to her. I'm seriously not messing around here, and she shouldn't be waiting or expecting anything to randomly improve. It's literally only going to get worse and worse with every passing day that I'm denied the connection with Kimmy I've always wanted. I'm not doing reverse psychology or playing hard to get or looking for Celine to make any attempted efforts to earn my love or prove her sincerity or worthiness or anything like that. I do and will always only see any further, even remotely plausibly serious displays of affection from me pursuing some kind of romantic and or sexual relations with Celine as a massive trap she's fully, consciously and intentionally trying to ensnare me in with egregiously unapologetic extreme malice that at the very least is extremely carelessly, psychotically selfish in an intolerably narcissistic narcissistic manner, if not blatantly, fully consciously and intentionally, extremely abusively, coercively controlling attempts to bully, manipulate, discredit, exhaust, and overall harm me to the point of getting me murdered, as if I always wanted and or deserved that outcome due to being a massive fraud that I'm in reality very much not. I never wanted to ever show even plausibly serious affection towards anyone besides Kimmy. It was Chloe and my blood relatives trying to sabotage everything that tried to add confusion and blocks to make it seem like I wanted to distance myself from Kimmy, and combined with Kimmy's own extent of willful distancing herself from me and what seemed like eagerness to abandon me, it really made me feel unwanted and unloved. But I now really see the whole thing from a foundation of Chloe trying to sabotage it, and I can tell extremely clearly that any deviation from my original intent definitely will result in Chloe having an extremely gross, egregious violating access to my energy that will definitely massively harm me and anyone else I ever try to connect with, at least certainly with how things are now, and Chloe being neither incarcerated nor deceased. Because from what I can see, that's how she tried to plot and plan it, so she could try to constantly cause chaos and confusion and try to manipulate me into actually pivoting so she could rob me of my soul and make me seem like a fraud all along, while she siphons energy from the Lily, Jamie, Arya core trio of hers, along with others, to selfishly gain for her own business, as they'd send death magic to me that I'd have to constantly fight off just to survive while being egregiously, grossly undercompensated, if at all, for dealing with it. Celine may feel I'm being overly harsh and negative towards her, but she needs to recognize that if she feels offended or hurt or genuinely feels I'm perceiving her personality extremely grossly inaccurately, she should see that as a reflection of how egregiously Chloe's been violating my energy and harming me with what is in reality absolutely unapologetic, absolutely unconditional, unrestrained, malicious intent, and she should direct her anger at Chloe, not me. I wouldn't be surprised if Celine feels a sense of loyalty to me, even, actually. A loyalty that Chloe has never really felt and will never really feel towards me, because she's a lot more unhinged and actually evil than Celine, at least from what I can tell. I imagine Celine's possible feeling of some kind of loyalty towards me is her feeling some of the loyalty I've shown Kimmy despite all the lies and harm Chloe has tried to put between us. Because of Celine's strong bond with Kimmy as some kind of protection from the threat to Kimmy I was egregiously wrongly portrayed as, I feel rather confident that Celine will only increasingly clearly recognize over time why I keep pointing fingers at Chloe and my blood relatives and other scumbags from my past I've long cut out of my life. I'm hearing Kristen's egregious exploitation of me has something substantial to do with why Celine's been left feeling like I'm aloof or perhaps even intentionally malicious in my connection with her. I'm also hearing involvement from possibly someone who's a Cancer zodiac sign. Don't know who that might be. I actually don't know a lot of the birthdays of most of my blood relatives or people I once went to high school with, to be honest. There's also apparently a heavy Leo sign energy, but again, I'm not sure where that's coming from. I mentioned Kristen sabotaging Celine's mental, but I suppose she also could be attacking his now too, since he can no longer hide behind how he was exploiting my mental to defend him for him entirely to my detriment against my consent without me even knowing it. I won't necessarily make assertions about whether either deserve the attacks from the other or not, because both Kristen and Celine's energies are looking extremely dark to me at this time, and I feel it's best to remain distant from both and revoke any access to my energy from them that they might have tried to get from me. And see, the thing is, not only was I super loyal to Kimmy, but I also never threw Chloe under the bus for selfish gain with any extent of dishonesty about anything either. Chloe's genuinely just such egregious, absolutely irredeemable, subhuman filth that she actually, completely unapologetically, extremely egregiously exploited every bit of kindness and love and everything I ever had to offer, and I honestly even feel a little bad for Celine because she's probably going to suffer a lot because of that. But I believe she'll see the truth in the end. Let's put it like this. If you're spiritual, you might be familiar with the term dark night of the soul. I feel like people throw it around quite a bit, or maybe it's intended to be stated with like degrees of severity or something, but I sort of thought of it as a one-time darkest place you've ever felt you've been type event. Mine was a relentless barrage of countless murder attempts on me in the physical world that I had to run from all night, where I literally felt like I shifted dimensions countless times just to stay alive. It wasn't anything shameful, but I won't even explain how strange some of the stuff I had to do to survive was. It was extremely stressful and tense. It was like every move, everywhere I turned, had trap after trap, and one wrong move, one lack of ultra-precise instinct, and I'd get shot in the head and killed by either gangsters or police that were stalking me to murder me simply because they'd learned who I am, and I guess the extent of egregious defamation of me had reached heights they genuinely believed I deserved death. That happened not very long after Celine essentially forced me to show her affection that one time. It was like I'd been in a trap all along, and literally nothing I ever could have done could have led to me escaping it, even with the most exceptional critical thinking ability. And on top of feeling spiritually violated beyond words, I was being hunted by countless armed men, and I couldn't turn to the police because they were themselves involved. I couldn't get protection from any location because they had forces pulling up constantly and waiting around so many corners and in even more obscure places. I couldn't buy or talk my way out of it. I literally felt like I was doomed to die an extremely wrongful death for many hours non-stop, literally for being a genuinely good person. By the time it all ended, I was severely dehydrated with my clothes trashed and feeling like I'm near death as morning arrived. I knew it wasn't a dream because there was no moment of feeling like I woke up. The reality persisted, and I hadn't expected anything else either. It was shortly after that I was essentially forced under duress to sign the contract with Dixon that John tried to gaslight me means I sold my soul to Dixon. I'd gotten arrested because I had ID on me at the time, and the police noticed my state and demanded I show them ID and threatened to arrest me if I didn't empty the bag I had on me at the time with the ID I still had at the time in it. There was a warrant for my arrest because the gross negligence and corruption of the government that led to me initially being charged and thrown in jail and ending up forced under duress while jailed to plead guilty without even knowing my rights, had a probation condition of no contact, which I guess I'd breached due to sending emails to my mailing list where at least one of the people I wasn't supposed to contact was on it. Dixon bailed me out, but then demanded I leave his house immediately, even though the terms for the bail were supposed to be I live with him. He pressured me to accept what he originally intended to only be $10,000, which, again, he was unwilling to give me all at once. I've already explained how I believe he must have been intentionally hoping I'd spend it carelessly and neglect my efforts defending my reputation so he could have me murdered and make it seem justified. And we arrive at present day, where he's still trying to weaponize egregious corruption in the Canadian government to make me have to be paranoid even dealing with the law after he intentionally conspired against me with Kristen, John, and others to put me in this extremely severely disadvantaged state with hitmen literally coming after me daily.